It is not just physical. Jack and I have a connection. We understand each other in ways you and I never did. That is what my wife said after I found her explicit messages and hotel receipts. Now she is crying and begging me not to destroy her lover's life. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor, sending ceramic shards skidding across the tiles as if my world were crumbling in real time. There on my wife's phone screen, glowing with the harsh blue light of betrayal, was a text message that made my heart drop to my feet. Can't wait to feel you again, baby. Tonight at the Marriott Room, 412. We're the cologne I bought you, Jack. Before we dive further into this story, I have a small request. Please subscribe, leave a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories from Reddit. I'm Will Drayan, 42 years old, senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, and apparently the biggest idiot in the Chicago suburbs. Standing in my kitchen with granite countertops at 6:30 in the morning, staring at the evidence that my 15-year marriage was a lie, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest where my heart used to be. Marta had left her phone on the counter while she showered, something she never did. Her iPhone used to be glued to the palm of her hand like a surgical implant. But this morning, fate or stupidity had made her careless, and now I knew why she'd been working so many late nights at the ad agency. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the message thread. Months of exchanges, explicit photos that burned my eyes, plans for weekend getaways she told me were client retreats. The cologne she'd given me for Christmas, claiming she'd picked it out herself, was apparently intended for someone else entirely. Jack Turmall, I knew that name. He was a minor local celebrity of sorts, a former college football player who now did morning radio and sold insurance. Married to Dana Turmall, a prosecutor in the district attorney's office. I'd met them both at neighborhood barbecues. I'd seen Jack's arrogant smile while he dominated conversations. I'd seen how Marta's eyes lingered on his athletic frame. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam would be fogging up the bathroom mirror, and Marta would be going through her elaborate morning routine, the same one she'd carried out for 15 years. Except now I knew she wasn't just getting ready for work, she was getting ready for another day of lies. I grabbed my own phone and started taking screenshots. Every message, every photo, every piece of evidence. My financial training had taught me the importance of documentation, and in that moment, I was building a file that would make a prosecutor cry tears of joy. The water stopped running. I heard Marta's footsteps on the hardwood floor upstairs, moving between the bathroom and our bedroom. Our bedroom where she'd been lying next to me every night while planning her next encounter with Jack. I deleted the evidence of my snooping from her phone and placed it exactly where she'd left it. Then I swept up the broken cup, threw the pieces in the trash, and poured myself a cup of fresh coffee. When Marta entered the kitchen 10 minutes later, wrapped in her silk robe with her hair still damp, I was sitting at the breakfast bar reading the Wall Street Journal as if it were any other morning. "Good morning, honey," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably been wrapped around another man's anatomy less than 12 hours ago. "You're up early?" "I couldn't sleep," I replied without looking up from the paper. "Big presentation today." She grabbed her phone and checked it immediately. A reflex as automatic as breathing. I watched her face out of the corner of my eye. I saw the slight smile that crossed her lips as she read something. Probably another message from Jack. "I'll be late tonight," she said, pouring herself coffee. "Dinner with a client." "Which client?" I asked casually. "Henderson Industries. You know how demanding they are." "Henderson Industries." I'd helped her prepare for that account 3 years ago. They were based in Milwaukee and rarely required evening meetings. Another lie spoken with the same tone she used to ask me to take out the trash. "Well, don't work too hard," I said, folding the paper and standing up. "I wouldn't want you to burn out." She stared at me as if trying to detect sarcasm, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned to keep a poker face in boardrooms full of executives trying to hide their company's financial disasters. Marta's deception was amateur hour in comparison. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my briefcase, and headed to the garage. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw her watching me from the kitchen window. She looked worried, and she should be, because Will Drayan, the boring husband she'd been cheating on, was about to become the most dangerous enemy she'd ever had. The drive to my office gave me time to think. 15 years of marriage, and I'd been faithful every day. I'd rejected advances from colleagues, ignored flirtations from neighbors, and dedicated myself to building the life Marta said she wanted. The house in Riverside, the luxury cars, the country club membership, the vacation home in Wisconsin. all funded by my salary, while she played at being creative director at a mid-level ad agency. And this is how she repaid me with lies and hotel rooms and another man's hands on her body. By the time I arrived at Morrison & Associates, my shock had crystallized into something harder and more focused. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to be the cuckolded husband begging for another chance or silently accepting divorce papers. I was going to be the architect of consequences, and Marta was about to learn that some safes should never be opened. But first I needed more information. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal, map out everyone involved, and identify every pressure point. In finance, we call it due diligence. In revenge, I guess you'd call it planning. I spent my lunch hour researching Jack Turmall, his radio show, his insurance business, his social media presence. He was exactly the type of man Marta would find irresistible, confident to the point of arrogance, physically imposing with a kind of easy charm that made people forget he was essentially a mediocre ex-athlete living on past glories. More importantly, he was married to Dana Turmall, a woman whose career depended on her reputation for moral integrity. A prosecutor couldn't afford scandals, especially the kind involving adultery and public humiliation. Jack might think he was playing a casual game, but in reality, he was sitting on a powder keg. I also looked up Marta's colleagues at the agency. Her boss, Richard Steinberg, was a notorious purist about professional conduct. The company had fired 2 employees last year for inappropriate relationships. If evidence of Marta's affair became public, especially evidence involving explicit communications during work hours, her career would be over faster than a bad ad campaign. The pieces of my plan began to fall into place. This wasn't going to be about screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. This was going to be surgical, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Marta wanted to play games, but she was about to learn she'd chosen the wrong opponent. That night I sat in my home office and organized the screenshots I'd taken that morning, the explicit messages, the photos, the planning conversations. I created encrypted folders, backed everything up to secure cloud storage, and printed hard copies that I locked in my desk drawer. Preservation of evidence. Lesson number 1 of any legal thriller. Downstairs I could hear Marta getting ready for her dinner with the client. The shower running again, the hair dryer, the careful selection of clothes. She was putting on a performance like she'd been doing for months, but tonight was going to be the last time she lied to my face without consequences. When she came down, she was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The irony was almost poetic. She'd paired it with jewelry I'd given her and perfume I'd bought during a business trip to New York. Everything about her appearance was funded by my money and chosen to seduce another man. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slightly to show off the dress. "Beautiful," I said, and I meant it. She was beautiful. That's what made this betrayal hurt so much. Jack is a lucky man. The words escaped me before I could stop them. Marta froze mid-spin. Her face paled beneath her carefully applied makeup. "What did you say?" I looked up from my laptop with the most innocent expression I could fake. "I said you're a lucky woman. Henderson Industries is a big account." She stared at me for a long moment, searching for hidden meanings in my face. I kept my expression bland and turned my attention back to the computer screen. "I'll be home late," she said finally. "I'm sure you will." After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my leather armchair thinking. The house felt different now, contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening under my nose. Every room held memories that had been retroactively poisoned. The kitchen where she'd planned her flings, the bedroom where she'd lied next to me, the living room where she'd probably texted Jack while I watched TV, but I wasn't going to let her destroy what I'd built. This house, this life, this future I'd worked so hard to create. None of it was going to be sacrificed on the altar of her selfishness. Instead, I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she'd thrown away and exactly what it was going to cost her. My phone vibrated with a text from Greg Morrison, my best friend and the son of the firm's founding partner. "Poker night Friday. You in?" I looked at the message for a long moment, then replied, "Absolutely. I'm feeling lucky." The next morning I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. I told my assistant I had food poisoning and would be working from home. Then I settled into my office with a pot of coffee and a legal pad. If I was going to destroy my wife's life, I needed to do it right. First stop. Rena Kowalski, a private investigator I'd met during a corporate fraud case 2 years prior. She was a former Chicago police detective who'd gone private after getting fed up with department politics. Tough as nails, smart as hell, and completely unsentimental when it came to cheating spouses. Her office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax prep service, which seemed fitting for someone who dealt with other people's dirty laundry. Rena looked exactly like Central Casting would choose her for a female PI. 50-something gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in jeans and a jacket that couldn't quite hide her shoulder holster. "Well," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon. What can I do for you?" I handed her a USB drive containing the screenshots from Marta's phone. "My wife is having an affair. I need documentation." Rena plugged the drive into her computer and spent 10 minutes scrolling through the evidence. Her expression never changed, but I saw her eyebrows arch slightly at some of the more explicit content. "Well, you've already done half my job for me," she said finally. "This is pretty damning. What exactly are you looking for?" "Everything," I said. "Financial records, timeline documentation, evidence of where they've been meeting. I want to know how long it's been going on, how much of my money she spent on it, and what kind of legal exposure I'm facing." "Are you thinking divorce?" "I'm thinking nuclear war." Rena leaned back in her chair and studied me with the same intensity she'd probably used to interrogate suspects. "You seem pretty calm for a guy whose world just fell apart." "I'm past the emotional stage. Now I'm in the planning stage. Those are usually the most dangerous clients," she said. But she was smiling. "All right, well, let's burn this to the ground. My rate is $500 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer." I handed her a check for $5,000. "How long do you think you'll need?" "Give me a week, maybe less if they're as sloppy as these text messages suggest." While Rena worked her magic, I focused on the financial aspects of Marta's betrayal. Our joint credit card statements told a story of deceit that made my accountant's heart weep. Charges at Victoria's Secret for lingerie, I'd never seen expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, hotel rooms booked during her supposed business trips. In the last 6 months, she'd spent nearly $8,000 of our money on her affair. But the real revelation came when I investigated our investment accounts. Marta had been systematically moving money from our joint savings into a personal account I didn't know existed. Small amounts, never enough to catch my eye, but over the course of a year it added up to nearly $30,000. She'd been planning her exit strategy, building a cushion for her new life with Jack. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that I actually laughed out loud. Marta wasn't just cheating on me, she was embezzling from our marriage. The woman who had promised to love, honor, and respect me was systematically looting our shared assets to fund her affair. That night, I confronted her with the subtlety of a chess master. "Honey," I said during dinner, "I was looking at our investment statements today. Did you move some money recently?" She didn't even blink. "I transferred some funds to the money market account. Better interest rate." "Which account?" "I don't see it on our statements." "It's a new account. I haven't added you as a joint holder yet." Another lie spoken with the same casual ease she'd been using for months. I nodded and changed the subject to her day at work, listening to her fabricate stories about clients and campaigns while I mentally cataloged every deception. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I used her laptop to access her personal email account. The password was our anniversary date, which would have been touching if she weren't using the account to coordinate her infidelity. Her inbox was a treasure trove of evidence, hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, and exchanges with Jack that made my skin crawl. But the most interesting discovery was an email thread with her sister Linda, who lived in Portland. Marta had been confiding in her about the affair, describing Jack as her soulmate and me as a financial security blanket. She was ready to discard me. Linda had been encouraging the relationship, even offering to let Marta stay with her during the divorce proceedings. The sisterly conspiracy added another layer to my growing understanding of the betrayal. This wasn't a momentary slip or a midlife crisis. This was a calculated campaign to replace me with someone more exciting while keeping me around long enough to maximize the financial settlement. I forwarded the most damaging emails to a secure account. Then I deleted the browser history and closed the laptop. Upstairs, Marta was drying her hair, getting ready for another night of lies. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant another late night at the office and another meetup in a hotel room. But tomorrow was also poker night with Greg and the guys. And Greg Morrison, besides being my best friend, was also one of the best divorce lawyers in Chicago. It was time to start building my legal strategy. Friday night found me in Greg's basement, surrounded by cigar smoke and the comfortable camaraderie of men who had known each other since college. Besides Greg, there was Tom Fletcher, a real estate attorney, Mike Sullivan, a criminal defense lawyer, and Dave Chin, a corporate litigator. It was like having my own legal dream team. I waited until we were 3 hands into the game before dropping my bombshell. Hypothetically, I said, discarding 2 cards, what would you guys do if you found out your wife was cheating on you? The table went silent. Tom looked at me with concern, while Mike choked on his beer. This isn't hypothetical, is it? Greg said. I shook my head and told them everything. The text messages, the financial deception, the systematic betrayal. By the time I finished, Dave was taking notes on a legal pad, and Mike was already planning strategy. Jesus, well, Tom said. I'm sorry, man. That's brutal. How do you want to play this? Greg asked. The divorce is going to be ugly with that much deceit involved. I don't want a divorce, I said. Not yet. Anyway, I want her to understand what she's thrown away. I want her to feel the consequences of her choices before I decide whether to end the marriage. Mike leaned forward, his criminal defense instincts kicking in. What kind of consequences are we talking about here? Legal, social, professional. I want her affair exposed in a way that destroys her credibility and her reputation. I want Jack's wife to know what her husband has been doing. I want Marta's boss to understand she's been using company resources for personal matters. I want everyone in our social circle to know exactly what kind of person she really is. Dave looked up from his notes. That's not revenge, Will. That's just truth and consequences. Exactly. We spent the next 2 hours planning my truth-telling campaign. Greg would prepare the divorce papers as a backup plan, but wouldn't file them unless I gave the order. Tom would help me protect our assets and document Marta's financial deception. Mike would make sure everything I did stayed within legal boundaries. Dave would handle any corporate implications if Marta's employer decided to take action. You realize, Greg said as we wrapped up the night, once you start this, there's no going back. Your marriage is over either way. My marriage was over the moment she decided to betray me, I replied. I'm just making sure she understands the price of that decision. Saturday morning, Rena called with her preliminary report. She'd been following Marta and Jack for 3 days, documenting their meetings and photographing their activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Hotel visits, restaurant dates, shopping trips where Jack bought her jewelry with what was probably his wife's money. They aren't even trying to be discreet, Rena said. Yesterday, they had lunch at a restaurant 2 blocks from his wife's office. They're either incredibly stupid or they think they're untouchable. Probably both, I said. And Jack's background? There's an interesting story there. He's been married to Dana for 12 years, but this isn't his first affair. I found evidence of at least 2 other relationships in the last 5 years. The guy is a serial cheater. Does his wife know? Hard to say. She's smart enough to figure it out if she wanted to, but prosecutors are good at compartmentalizing. She might be choosing not to see what she doesn't want to face. That's about to change. You want me to approach her? Not yet. I want to orchestrate this carefully. When Dana finds out about her husband's affairs, I want it to happen in a way that maximizes the impact on both of them. I spent the weekend planning my next moves. Marta was distracted and nervous, probably sensing that something had changed in our dynamic. She kept asking if I felt okay, if something was wrong at work, if I was upset about something. Each time I assured her everything was fine, that I was just tired from the big presentation I'd supposedly been working on. Sunday night, while she was on the phone with her sister Linda, I made my first move. I created an anonymous email account and sent a carefully worded message to Richard Steinberg, Marta's boss at the ad agency. Mr. Steinberg, I wrote, I thought you should be aware that one of your employees has been using company resources for personal matters. Marta Drayan has been conducting an extramarital affair, using her company phone and email, meeting her lover during work hours, and charging personal expenses to company accounts. I've attached documentation that you might find interesting. A concerned citizen. I attached selected screenshots of Marta's text messages edited to remove anything too explicit but clear enough to establish the nature of the relationship. I also included copies of credit card receipts showing charges to the company card for restaurants and hotels at times when Marta was supposedly meeting with clients. The email was scheduled to send Monday morning at 9 a.m., just when Steinberg would be reviewing his weekly correspondence. By the time Marta got to work, her boss would be waiting for her with questions she couldn't answer. But that was just the opening move. I had bigger plans for Jack Termal and his prosecutor wife. Plans that would make Marta's employment embarrassment look like a gentle warning shot. As I went to bed Sunday night, listening to Marta's steady breathing beside me, I felt a strange sense of peace. For months, I'd been living in a world of lies without knowing it. Now I was finally going to restore the balance. The truth was about to make a comeback in a very big way. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, rainy weather that perfectly matched my mood. I got up at 5:30, sitting in the dark kitchen with my coffee and my laptop, watching the clock count down until 9 a.m. when my email would hit Richard Steinberg's inbox. Marta's phone was charging on the counter next to me, silent and innocent like a loaded gun waiting to go off. At 6:15, I heard the shower start upstairs. Marta's morning routine as predictable as the sunrise. 20 minutes in the shower, 10 minutes on hair, 15 minutes on makeup, 5 minutes picking an outfit that looked professional for her colleagues and tempting for Jack. I'd been watching this performance for 15 years without realizing it was exactly that, a performance. Today was going to be different. Today the performance was going to end. At 6:40 the shower stopped. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the darkness of the kitchen envelop me like armor. This was the moment. The moment I'd been planning since I discovered her betrayal, the moment Marta Drayan would learn her husband wasn't the passive, trusting fool she thought he was. She came down at 7:10, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who has places to go and people to deceive. She was wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought her for Christmas, paired with the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Even her betrayal was adorned with my gifts. She flipped on the kitchen lights and stopped dead when she saw me sitting at the breakfast bar. "Jesus, will, you scared me. What are you doing sitting in the dark?" Thinking I said calmly, "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her freeze. She looked at me more closely, probably noticing for the first time that I was fully dressed at 7 a.m., that my laptop was closed in front of me, that I was holding her phone in my hand. "Is that my phone?" she asked. "Yes, it is," along with some very interesting reading material. The color drained from her face. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "The trip is canceled," I said. "What trip?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Room 412 at the Marriott. Tonight at 8. Jack is going to be very disappointed when you don't show up." Marta's knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the edge of the counter for support. "Well, I can explain." "No need to explain. It's all very clear. 6 months of hotel rooms, restaurant dates, and shopping trips. All paid for with our money, of course. Jack isn't just taking my wife, he's taking her at my expense." She started to speak, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Sit down." "I don't want to sit. I want you to give me back my phone, and I want to know what gives you the right to sit down, Marta." There was something in my voice that made her obey. She pulled out the chair opposite me and sat heavily, her hands trembling. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, placing her phone on the counter between us. "You're going to give me the passwords to all your accounts, email, social media, banking, everything. You're going to hand over your laptop, and you're going to lift up your dress." "What?" "You heard me. Lift up your dress. I want to see what you're wearing underneath. I have a feeling it's not the cotton underwear you usually wear to work." "I'm not doing that." "Yes, you will. Or I'm going to forward every text message, every photo, and every email to Richard Steinberg right now. I'm also going to send them to the Chicago Tribune gossip columnist, your mother, and every person in your contact list. Your choice." Marta's face crumbled. Tears began to stream down her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark tracks on her cheeks, but she stood up and slowly lifted the hem of her dress. Red lace, a matching set I'd never seen before. Probably bought with our joint credit card for Jack's viewing pleasure. "Very nice," I said, taking a picture with my own phone. "Jack has expensive taste. Too bad he's not going to see it tonight. Please, will, I know how this looks, but I also know how it looks. It looks like my wife has been sleeping with another man for 6 months while lying to my face every day." My voice remained calm, even conversational, which seemed to scare her more than if I'd screamed. "It's not what you think. It's not just physical. Jack and I have a connection. We understand each other in a way you and I never have." "A connection? How romantic. Does his wife know about this connection?" Marta's eyes went wide. "You can't tell Dana. She's a prosecutor. It would ruin Jack's life. That's the idea." I opened my laptop and showed her the screen. It was a draft email addressed to Dana Termal at the district attorney's office, with attachments containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered about her husband's affair. "One click," I said, "and Dana will see exactly what kind of man she married, along with photographic proof and a complete timeline of his activities." I imagined that would be very embarrassing for a prosecutor whose career depends on her reputation for moral integrity. "You wouldn't. Try me." Marta stared at the screen, then at me. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand what you've thrown away. I want you to feel the consequences of your choices, and I want you to know that your life as you knew it is over." I clicked send on the email to Dana. Then I opened another draft. That was your lover's wife. This one goes to your boss. Screenshots of your text messages, documentation of your hotel visits during work hours, and copies of receipts showing you've been charging personal expenses to the company credit card. Richard will fire me. Yes, he will. Probably today. I sent that email too. Then I opened a third draft. And this one goes to your mother. All those photos you've been sending Jack, along with some of his more colorful replies. I think Magda will be especially interested in the one where you're wearing her grandmother's pearls while describing what you want to do to another woman's husband. Please don't send that to my mother. She'll disown me. She should. You're a disgrace to the family name. I sent the third email and then closed the laptop. All done. By 9 this morning, every important person in your life will know exactly what kind of person you really are. Marta collapsed in her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just sharing the truth. You did this to yourself the moment you decided to betray our marriage. I never wanted it to happen. It just happened. This wasn't an accident. You've been lying to me systematically for months. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts. You've been planning your exit strategy while pretending to be my loving wife. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. I stood up and walked around the table to where she was sitting. She flinched when I got close, but I just put my hands on the back of her chair and leaned down to whisper in her ear. But here's the thing, Marta. I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, you'll wish you'd never met Jack Turmall. You'll wish you'd never betrayed me, and you'll understand that there are consequences for destroying someone who loved you. I straightened up and walked back to my side of the table. Now you have two choices. You can go upstairs, pack a bag, and leave this house forever. Or you can stay, play the role of the remorseful wife, and hope that someday I might consider forgiving you. But either way, your affair is over. Jack's life is about to get very complicated, and yours is about to become a living hell. And if I choose to leave, then you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. I'll freeze all our joint accounts, file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and make sure you don't get a dime of my money in the settlement. You can go live with your sister Linda in Portland and start over with whatever Jack is willing to give you, assuming his wife doesn't take everything he has in their divorce. And if you stay, you'll follow my rules. You'll go where I tell you to go. You'll do what I tell you to do, and you'll say what I tell you to say. You'll become the perfect wife, at least in public, and maybe in time I'll decide if our marriage is worth saving. Marta looked at me with a mixture of fear and hatred that was almost satisfying. Are you enjoying this? Yes, I am. For 6 months you've been having fun at my expense. Now it's my turn. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara even more. I'll stay. Good choice. Now go upstairs and fix your makeup. Today you're going to work, and you're going to face whatever Richard Steinberg has to say to you. You're going to apologize, beg for your job, and accept whatever consequences he decides to impose. And tonight you'll come home and tell me exactly how it went. She stood up slowly like an old woman. And what about Jack? Jack is no longer your problem. You're going to send him a text message right now and tell him the affair is over. You'll never see him again, talk to him, or think about him. He's about to have much bigger problems than losing his married girlfriend. I handed her the phone. She took it with shaking fingers and typed a message. It's over. Don't contact me again. My husband knows everything. Send it, I said. She hesitated a moment, then pressed send. A few seconds later, the phone vibrated with Jack's reply. What are you talking about? I took the phone from her and typed a reply. This is Wildrean, Marta's husband. Your wife will be receiving some interesting emails this morning. I suggest you get a lawyer. Jack's reply came immediately. You bastard. I showed the message to Marta, then deleted the entire conversation thread. And that's the last you'll hear from your soulmate. Now get ready for work. You have a very interesting day ahead of you. She walked up the stairs as if she were heading to her own execution. At the bottom of the stairs, she turned to me. I did love you, Will. I still love you. No, you don't. You love the security I provided and the lifestyle I made possible, but you never loved me enough to be faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. That's not love, Marta, that's just convenience. She started to answer, but I held up a hand. Go to work. Face the consequences. And remember, this is just day one. Things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. As she disappeared upstairs, I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I had emails to send, phone calls to make, and a reputation to destroy. Jack Turmall was about to learn that stealing another man's wife came with a price he couldn't afford. And Marta was about to discover that betraying someone who loved her was the biggest mistake of her life. The kitchen was silent again, but it felt different now. The lies had been exposed, the truth had been spoken, and the consequences were in motion. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. It was going to be a very interesting day. By 10:30 that morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. The first call was from Richard Steinberg himself, Marta's boss at the ad agency. His voice was tight with barely contained anger. "Mr. Drayan, I need to speak with you about your wife's employment situation. I figured you might," I said calmly. "I assume you received my email." I did, and I must say this is one of the most disturbing situations I've encountered in 20 years of running this company. Using company resources for personal matters, charging personal expenses to corporate accounts, maintaining inappropriate relationships during work hours. It's grounds for immediate termination. I understand completely. What do you need from me? Documentation. If we're going to fire her for cause, I need everything you can provide. Text messages, receipts, timeline proof. Our legal department wants to make sure we're covered in case she tries to claim wrongful termination. I spent the next hour on the phone with Steinberg and his lawyers, walking them through the evidence I'd gathered. By the end of the conversation, Marta's career in advertising was effectively over. Word would spread through the industry in a matter of days, and no reputable agency would hire someone who'd been fired for carrying on extramarital affairs on company time. The second call was from Dana Termal. Her voice was ice-cold and professional, the tone of a prosecutor who just discovered a new case. "Mr. Drayan, I received your email this morning. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the situation." "Of course. When and where?" "My office. 2 o'clock today." "And Mr. Drayan, bring everything you have." Dana's office in the district attorney's building was exactly what I expected. Diplomas on the walls, law books on the shelves, and the kind of organized efficiency that comes with prosecuting criminals. She was an attractive woman in her 40s with steel gray eyes and the kind of controlled demeanor that probably made defense attorneys nervous. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "I must say your email was quite enlightening. I thought you should know what your husband has been up to." "How long have you known about the affair?" "I discovered it 3 days ago, but based on the evidence I've gathered, it's been going on for at least 6 months. She nodded, taking notes on a legal pad. "And this isn't Jack's first extramarital relationship. According to my private investigator, he's had at least 2 other affairs in the last 5 years. Apparently your husband has a pattern of behavior." Dana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And what exactly do you want from me, Mr. Drayan?" "Nothing. I just thought you deserved to know the truth about the man you're married to." The truth? She leaned back in her chair and studied me with the same intensity she probably used on hostile witnesses. "You realize destroying my marriage doesn't undo the damage to yours. I'm not trying to destroy your marriage, I'm just sharing information. What you do with it is your choice, but you are trying to destroy my husband. Your husband destroyed himself the moment he decided to sleep with my wife. I'm just ensuring there are consequences for that decision." Dana was silent for a long moment, then opened a folder on her desk. "I've been married to Jack for 12 years. I've suspected his infidelity for at least half that time, but I chose to ignore it for the sake of our stability. Prosecutors can't afford messy personal lives, and divorce would have been complicated. And now I have documentation that makes it impossible to ignore. Jack has been using our joint credit cards to fund his affairs, which constitutes financial fraud. He's been lying under oath about his whereabouts, which could affect cases where his testimony was material, and he's been carrying on these relationships while presenting himself as a family man, which could constitute consumer fraud in his insurance business." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "Sounds like he's in serious legal trouble." "He will be. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm going to make sure he loses everything. His business, his reputation, his financial assets, everything. By the time I'm done with Jack Termal, he'll be lucky to find work selling used cars." "And what about Marta?" "Your wife is a victim in this situation, Mr. Drayan. Jack pursued her, manipulated her, and used her for his own gratification. I don't hold her responsible for my husband's predatory behavior." I laughed, a sound that made Dana raise her eyebrows. "With all due respect, Mrs. Termal, you don't know my wife very well. Marta wasn't a victim, she was a willing participant who knew exactly what she was doing. Perhaps, but legally speaking, she's not my problem. Jack is." Walking out of Dana's office, I felt a deep satisfaction. Jack's life was about to become a legal nightmare, and he'd brought it entirely on himself. But Dana was wrong about one thing. Marta wasn't going to escape the consequences just because she was technically the other woman instead of the cheating spouse. I had plans for Marta that would make her wish she'd never heard the name Jack Turmall. That night, I was waiting in the living room when Marta came home from what had obviously been the worst day of her professional life. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was messy, and she looked like she'd aged 5 years in 8 hours. How did it go? I asked pleasantly. She collapsed into the armchair opposite me. I got fired. Richard called me into his office at 9:30 and fired me on the spot. Security escorted me out of the building like I was a criminal. I'm sorry to hear that, although I can't say I'm surprised. They're also coming after me for the money I charged to the company card. They want full restitution plus penalties? It's going to be almost $15,000. That's unfortunate. I hope you have that amount in your personal account. She looked at me with desperation. You know I don't, Will. Please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't pay that back without help. They're threatening to file criminal charges if I don't pay in 30 days. Then you better start looking for a new job quickly. Who's going to hire me? Richard is telling everyone in the industry what happened. I'm blacklisted. I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. You made these choices, Marta. Now you get to live with the consequences. She started crying again. The kind of desperate sobs that come from someone whose world is crumbling in real time. And Jack, have you heard from him? No, but I imagine he's having an interesting conversation with his wife right now. Dana seemed very motivated to make sure he pays for his infidelity. You told his wife. I told his wife everything. Text messages, photos, timeline, financial records, the whole package. She's filing for divorce tomorrow and pressing charges for criminal fraud. Jack is about to lose his business, his house, and his reputation. Congratulations, Marta. You picked a real winner. The color drained from her face. Criminal charges. Apparently, using joint credit cards to fund extramarital affairs constitutes financial fraud. Who knew? And since Jack has been lying about his activities under oath in various legal proceedings, he's also facing perjury charges. Dana is a very thorough prosecutor. Marta covered her face with her hands. This is a nightmare. No, this is justice. You and Jack thought you could betray your spouses without consequences. You were wrong. I stood up and walked over to where she sat. But here's the thing, Marta. Jack's problems are just beginning, and so are yours, because tomorrow I'm going to start phase 2 of your education and consequences. She looked at me with red, puffy eyes. What's phase 2? Social destruction. Everyone in our neighborhood, everyone at the country club, everyone in our social circle is going to know exactly what kind of person you are. By the time I'm finished, you won't be able to show your face anywhere in this town without people whispering about what you did. Well, please, I get it. I understand I hurt you, but this has gone too far. Can't we try to fix things? Can't we go to therapy or something? I laughed. The same cold sound I'd made in Dana's office. Therapy? You want to go to therapy? After 6 months of systematic betrayal, financial theft, and pathological lies, you think a few sessions of therapy are going to fix this? I'm willing to try anything. I love you, Will. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I love you. You love my money, you love the security I provide, you love the lifestyle I've made possible, but you don't love me, Marta. If you loved me, you would never have done this. I returned to my chair and sat down. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to start looking for whatever job you can find. Retail, food service, office, cleaning, whatever pays you enough to cover your share of the household expenses, and start paying back the money you stole from your employer. My share of expenses. Did you think I was going to keep supporting you after what you've done? You're going to pay for your own food, your own clothes, your own gas, and half the household bills. You're also going to pay me back the $30,000 you spend on your affair plus interest. I can't afford all that on a minimum wage job. Then you better find 2 minimum wage jobs, or 3. I really don't care how you manage it as long as you do. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. You're not divorcing me. Not yet. Divorce would be too easy for you. You'd get half our assets, alimony, and a chance to start over somewhere else. I'm not going to reward your betrayal with a financial settlement. So what do you want? I want you to understand what you threw away. I want you to experience the consequences of your choices, and I want you to spend every day in the foreseeable future regretting what you did to our marriage. I stood up and headed for the stairs. Oh, and Marta, tomorrow morning, I'm changing the locks on the house. You'll get 1 key, and if you lose it or make copies, you'll sleep in your car. I'm also installing a security system with cameras in every room except the bathrooms. I want to make sure you're not tempted to do anything else stupid. You're going to spy on me in my own house. This isn't your house anymore. This is my house where you live as a guest. And guests follow the rules, or they're asked to leave. As I walked up the stairs, I could hear her crying behind me, but I felt no sympathy, no regret, no urge to comfort her. Marta had made her choices, and now she was going to live with them. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, new consequences, and new reminders of what her betrayal had cost her, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. After all, revenge was supposed to be satisfying, and so far it was exceeding my expectations. 3 weeks later, Marta was working double shifts at a discount clothing store in a strip mall 20 minutes from our neighborhood. The commute in her 10-year-old Honda Civic took her an hour each way, and she barely earned enough to cover the share of expenses I'd imposed on her. The woman who had once managed million-dollar ad campaigns was now folding sale dresses for $15 an hour. But that was just the financial component of her punishment. The social destruction had been much more thorough and infinitely more satisfying. It started with our neighbor Sharon Kellerman, the self-appointed gossip queen of Riverside Oaks. I'd invited her over for coffee and with apparent reluctance shared the difficult situation I was facing regarding Marta's infidelity. Sharon's eyes lit up like Christmas morning as I provided her with carefully edited details about the affair, the financial deception, and Marta's firing from her job. I had no idea, Sharon said, although her tone suggested she was delighted to finally have confirmation of what she'd probably suspected for months. Poor Will, how are you holding up? It's been a challenge, I said with just the right amount of wounded dignity. I'm trying to decide if the marriage can be saved, but the betrayal runs very deep. Within 24 hours, everyone in our social circle knew about Marta's affair. The story grew in the telling, as gossip always does, until Marta was portrayed as a predatory homewrecker who had seduced an innocent married man and stolen thousands of dollars from her employer to fund lavish shopping sprees. The country club was the most brutal setting for Marta's social execution. When she accompanied me to the monthly dance thinking that keeping up appearances might help her situation, she was met with a wall of cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Women who had been her friends for years suddenly had urgent business elsewhere when she tried to join their conversations. The final blow came when Margaret Payton, the club president's wife, approached our table during dinner. "Marta, dear," she said with the kind of fake sweetness that precedes social murder, "I wanted to inform you that the membership committee has decided to suspend your volunteering privileges until your situation is resolved. We simply can't have someone with questionable moral character representing the club at charity events." Marta's face went white. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all. We've heard quite detailed accounts of your behavior, and frankly, it's not the kind of example we want to set for the younger members." After Margaret walked away, Marta turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I had a feeling it might," I said, cutting my steak with deliberate precision. "Actions have consequences, Marta. You're just starting to understand what those consequences look like." But the country club humiliation was nothing compared to what happened when Jack Turmall finally decided to make his desperate play for redemption. It was a Thursday night, and I was in my home office reviewing financial reports when the doorbell rang. Marta was at work doing her second shift of the day, so I answered it myself. Jack was standing on my porch looking like a man who had aged a decade in 3 weeks. Dana's legal assault had been even more devastating than I'd expected. She'd frozen all of Jack's accounts filed for divorce with a demand for total asset forfeiture and convinced the district attorney's office to file fraud charges related to his misuse of joint credit cards. His insurance business was under investigation. His radio show had been canceled, and he was facing the possibility of jail time. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What's on your mind, Jack?" "You've destroyed my life." "You destroyed your own life when you decided to sleep with my wife." I just made sure there were consequences. He was bigger than me, more athletic, and probably capable of doing serious physical damage if he decided to get violent. But he looked broken, defeated, like a man who had finally realized the full extent of what he'd lost. "Dana is taking everything. The house, the business, the cars, everything. She's also pushing for criminal charges that could put me in jail for 5 years. Sounds like you should have thought of that before you started your affair. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It was supposed to be fun, something exciting. I never wanted to hurt anyone." I laughed. The same cold sound that had become my signature response to expressions of regret from people who had betrayed me. "You never wanted to hurt anyone." What did you think was going to happen, Jack? Did you think you could sleep with another man's wife indefinitely without consequences? I thought if we were careful, if we were discreet. You thought you were smarter than everyone else. You thought you were entitled to take what you wanted without paying the price. You were wrong. Jack's shoulders slumped. What do you want from me? Money. An apology. I'll do whatever you want. Just tell your wife to stop. Tell her to drop the criminal charges. Dana isn't my wife. Jack, she's your wife, and she's doing exactly what any intelligent woman would do upon discovering her husband has been systematically betraying her for years. Years. It wasn't years. The thing with Marta only lasted 6 months. But Marta wasn't your first affair. Was she, Jack? Dana told me about the others. She's been building a case against you for a long time, and my evidence just gave her the ammunition she needed to pull the trigger. Realization slowly dawned on his face. She knew. She knew about the others. She suspected, but suspicion isn't proof. And Dana is a prosecutor. She needed evidence that would stand up in court. Thanks to your affair with Marta, she now has more evidence than she knows what to do with. Jack's face crumbled. My life is over. Yes, it is. You're going to lose your house, your business, and probably your freedom. You're going to be a middle-aged ex-con with no money, no prospects, and a reputation that will follow you everywhere you go. Congratulations, Jack. You traded all that for 6 months with my wife. Was it worth it? He asked desperately. Destroying 2 marriages, ruining 4 lives. Was your revenge worth it? I considered the question seriously. You know what, Jack? It really was. Because not only did you sleep with my wife, you made me look like a fool. You turned me into the cuckold who was too stupid to see what was going on in his own marriage. You took something that belonged to me and used it for your own gratification. Marta doesn't belong to you. She's not property. No, she's not property, but she was my wife, and that meant something. It meant loyalty, fidelity, and respect. You helped her violate all those commitments, and now you're both going to pay the price. Jack turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. And what about Marta? What's going to happen to her? Marta is going to spend the next few years learning what it means to live without the security and comfort I provided her. She's going to work minimum wage jobs, live paycheck to paycheck, and be reminded every day of what her betrayal cost her. And then maybe if she's learned her lesson and if I decide she's suffered enough, I might consider forgiving her, or I might decide that some betrayals are unforgivable and file for divorce. I haven't made up my mind yet. You're a cold-blooded bastard, Will. No, Jack, just a man who refuses to be victimized without consequences. You and Marta thought you could betray me and walk away unscathed. You were wrong. After Jack left, I went back inside and poured myself a bourbon. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since I discovered Marta's affair. For the first time in months, I felt in total control of my life and my circumstances. An hour later, Marta came home from her evening shift, exhausted and defeated. She looked at me sitting in my leather chair with my drink and my newspaper, and I saw something akin to hatred flashing in her eyes. Jack came by, I said, without looking up from the financial section. She froze in the doorway. What did he want? To beg me to stop Dana's legal assault. Apparently, he's finally realized that actions have consequences. What did you tell him? I told him his problems were his own fault, and he should have thought about the consequences before he decided to sleep with you. Marta walked over to the bar and poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. How long is this going to go on, Will? How long is what going to go on? This, the punishment, the humiliation, the constant reminders of what I did. How long before you forgive me or divorce me? I folded my newspaper and looked directly at her. That depends entirely on you, Marta. When I'm satisfied that you understand the full extent of what you threw away, and when I'm convinced that you've learned your lesson, then I'll make a decision about our future. And how will you know when that happens? I'll know. She drank her wine in silence for several minutes, then set the glass down and looked at me with something approaching her old defiance. You know what, Will? You're right. I betrayed you. I lied to you. I stole money from our joint accounts and spent it on another man. I did all those things and I deserve to be punished for them. Yes, you do. But you know what else? You're enjoying this too much. You're getting too much pleasure out of my suffering. That's not justice, Will. That's cruelty. I stood up and walked over to where she stood. You want to know what cruelty is, Marta? Cruelty is lying to someone who loves you every day for 6 months. Cruelty is stealing money from your joint accounts to fund an affair. Cruelty is making your husband look like a fool while laughing about it with your lover. I never laughed at you with Jack. I read your text messages, remember? I saw what you said about me, about our marriage, about how boring and predictable I was compared to your exciting new boyfriend. Her face flushed. Those were just things I said in the heat of the moment. No, they weren't. They were your true feelings expressed when you thought no one would ever see them. And now I know exactly what you really think of me. So what happens now? I returned to my chair and sat down. Now you go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for another day of minimum wage work and social ostracism. And I continue to decide if you're worth the effort of forgiveness. And if you decide I'm not worth it, then you'll find out what it's like to start over with nothing but the clothes on your back and the reputation you've earned. Marta stared at me for a long moment, then turned and headed for the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped and looked back. I did love you well. Despite everything, I loved you. No, Marta, you loved what I could give you. You loved the security, the comfort, the lifestyle, but you never loved me enough to be faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. That's not love, that's just selfishness with better marketing. As she disappeared upstairs, I went back to my newspaper and my bourbon. Outside, it was starting to rain, the kind of steady downpour that would wash the streets clean and leave everything looking fresh and new in the morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new opportunities to remind Marta of the price of betrayal. But tonight, I was content to sit in my chair in my house, surrounded by the life I'd built and the control I'd regained. Jack Turmall was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Marta was working retail and living as a social pariah, and I was exactly where I belonged, in complete control of the consequences of their betrayal. It had been a very satisfying few weeks, and I had a feeling the best was yet to come. 6 months after the kitchen confrontation that changed everything, I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce papers. Greg Morrison looked at me from across his mahogany desk with the expression of someone who had watched his best friend navigate the most methodical destruction of a marriage he'd ever witnessed. "Are you sure about this, Will?" he asked. "After everything you've put her through, Marta might have learned her lesson. She's been working 2 jobs, paying you back, and hasn't even looked at another man. She's learned not to get caught," I corrected. "That's not the same thing as learning her lesson." The truth was more complicated than I was willing to admit to Greg. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched Marta transform from the entitled, deceitful woman who had betrayed our marriage into someone who understood the value of hard work and the cost of betrayal. She'd paid back every penny she'd stolen from me and her former employer. She'd endured social ostracism with a dignity I hadn't expected, and she'd never complained about the consequences I'd imposed on her. But every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had lied to my face for 6 months while planning her exit strategy. Every time she spoke, I heard the voice that had whispered sweet lies to another man. Every time she touched me, I felt the hands that had betrayed our wedding vows. Some betrayals, I'd learned, were simply unforgivable. "The papers are ready," Greg said. "No fault divorce, equitable division of assets. She gets half of everything plus alimony for 3 years. She'll get exactly what the law requires and not a penny more." Well, she's been through hell, don't you think? She put herself in hell when she decided to cheat on me. I just made sure she understood the consequences. Greg signed the papers and slid them across the desk. "You've changed. You know that. This whole experience has made you harder." "No, Greg. This experience has made me smarter. I spent 15 years trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I won't make that mistake again." That night, I found Marta in the kitchen making dinner after her shift at the department store. She'd lost weight in the last 6 months, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The woman who had once spent hundreds of dollars on salon treatments and designer clothes now shopped at thrift stores and cut her own hair. "We need to talk," I said, placing the divorce papers on the counter. She looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. "I expected this. Really, you've had your revenge, Will. You've made me pay for what I did in every way possible. I didn't think you'd want to stay married to someone you despise." "I don't despise you, Marta. I despise what you did. There's a difference." She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd confronted her 6 months ago. "What happens now? Now you sign the papers, and we both move on with our lives. You'll receive half our assets, which should be enough to start over somewhere else. I'd recommend Portland. Your sister Linda is still willing to take you in, and no one there knows about your affair. And what will you do?" "I'll sell this house and buy something smaller. Maybe travel for a while. I have some vacation time saved up." She picked up the divorce papers and thumbed through them slowly. "Equitable division of assets. That's more generous than I expected. It's what the law requires. Nothing more. Nothing less, Will. I know you'll probably never believe this, but I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did to us to our marriage. You didn't deserve any of that. I sat opposite her studying her face for signs of deceit, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. Why, Marta? After 15 years, why did you throw it all away? She was silent for a long time, looking at her hands. I felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions of being your wife without really living. Jack made me feel alive again. He made me feel desirable and exciting. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. You could have talked to me. We could have gone to therapy, taken a vacation, done something to reconnect. Instead, you chose to betray me. I know, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. She signed the papers with a steady hand, then slid them back across the table. There. It's done. It was done 6 months ago, Marta. This is just making it official. We sat in silence for several minutes. 15 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents and a conversation at the kitchen table. I heard about Jack, she said finally. Jack Turmal's downfall had been even more spectacular than I'd expected. Dana's legal assault had destroyed him financially and professionally. He'd been convicted of fraud and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. His insurance business had been liquidated to pay his debts, and he'd lost his house, his cars, and his reputation. The last I heard, he was working in a prison kitchen and would be eligible for parole in 6 months. What about him? Dana divorced him and took everything. He's in federal prison, and when he gets out, he'll have nothing. No money, no business, no prospects. His life is completely ruined. Yes, it is. Was it worth it destroying him so completely? I considered the question. Jack made a choice when he decided to pursue you. He knew you were married. He knew he was married, and he knew that affairs have consequences. He chose to take the risk, and now he's paying the price. But don't you feel any sympathy for him? No regret for what happened? No, I don't. Jack got exactly what he deserved. And you too. Marta flinched as if I'd slapped her. You deserve to lose your job, your friends, your reputation, and your marriage. You deserve the consequences of your choices. If those consequences were severe, it's because your betrayal was severe. And now you feel justice has been done. I thought seriously about the question. For the past 6 months, I'd watched both Marta and Jack pay the price for their betrayal. Jack had lost everything and was in federal prison. Marta had lost her career, her social standing, and now her marriage. Their affair had cost them both more than they'd ever imagined possible. Yes, I said, finally justice has been done. Then why don't you seem satisfied? Why do you look like a man who has won a war but lost something important in the process? It was an insightful question, and one I'd been avoiding asking myself. The truth was, my revenge had been complete and devastating, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I expected. I destroyed 2 lives and ended my marriage, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Because I said slowly, winning doesn't always feel like winning when the cost is so high. Then why did you do it? Why did you choose revenge instead of forgiveness? Because some betrayals are unforgivable, Marta. What you did to me, to us, to our marriage, crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand and I accept that, but I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, despite all the pain and humiliation and consequences, I don't regret loving you. I regret betraying you, but I don't regret the 15 years we had together. I don't either, I admit it. But those 15 years are over. We both have to find a way to move on. Will you be able to move on? I mean, or will this bitterness consume you? It was another question I'd been avoiding. The last 6 months had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I discovered I was capable of a level of calculation and cruelty that surprised even me. I'd systematically destroyed 2 lives without losing a moment's sleep. That kind of behavior leaves marks on a person's soul. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess I'll find out. Marta stood up and walked around the table to where I was sitting. For a moment, I thought she was going to try to kiss me or make one last plea for reconciliation. Instead, she put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. I hope you find peace, Will. I hope you find someone who deserves your loyalty and never makes you question it. And I hope someday you can forgive me, even if you can never forget what I did. Then she walked up the stairs to pack her belongings, leaving me alone in the kitchen where it had all started 6 months ago. 2 hours later, she came down with 2 suitcases and her purse. She'd left her wedding ring on the counter next to the divorce papers. I'll send someone for the rest of my things next week, she said. Where will you go? To Portland. Like you suggested, Linda is waiting for me, and there's a job waiting for me at a marketing firm there. It's not much, but it's a start. She walked to the front door, then turned one last time. Goodbye, Will. Despite everything, I'm glad I got to love you even if I didn't do it very well. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the house we'd shared for 15 years. I poured myself a bourbon and sat in my leather chair surrounded by the silence of victory. Jack Turmall was in jail. Marta was starting over with nothing. I had my house, my money, and my dignity intact. I'd won completely, decisively, and without compromise. So why did it feel so much like a defeat? Outside it was starting to rain again, and I realized that for the first time in 6 months I had no idea what came next. My revenge was complete. My marriage was over, and my future was a blank page. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the empty house and the hollow victory I'd fought so hard to win. Some safes should never be opened, I told the silence. But then again, some people shouldn't have locked them in the first place.